Praise be, Jesus and Mary. We all lived through the horrifying ordeal of the 2020 COVID lockdowns. Most people now see life as having returned to normalcy, and they rather just forget all about it. Yet there's a danger in not learning from the past. So today we invite Dr. Tim Brady, a medical doctor who has kept up with the evidence that is now being presented. He maintains that this was not a public health issue, but rather a military operation. And in the final segment of the episode, we will speak about how this terrible crisis fits into the message of Fatima, the apostasy in the church, and the new world order, which a global reset might bring about. Welcome to another episode of Fatima Today. My name is David Rodriguez. I'm the content director at the Fatima Center, and today I'm joined by Dr. Tim Brady. First time on our show, but welcome, Tim. It's good to have you here.
Thanks, Dave. Good to see you.
As many of you know, at Fatima, Our Lady did predict terrible chastisements if men did not cease offending God. She, of course, also has given us a solution to bring about peace in the world. Unfortunately, we have not yet obeyed. And I think everyone senses that things are getting worse. In fact, we've already seen many of Our Lady's prophecies come to pass, yet I, for one, am certainly convinced that the most terrifying of her predictions, you could say the worst of the chastisements, are still pending. As she said, there would be the annihilation of nations. We don't know exactly what that means. Some people have talked about the massive killing of the unborn as part of this. But I think that we should interpret these words in light of what we're seeing today. Now, of course, a few years back, a few decades back during the height of the Cold War, a lot of people were thinking that could mean a nuclear war. And it certainly could still be that also. However, today, it seems like new possibilities are opening up, at least to our natural reason. And one I think of in particular, which is why I asked you, Dr. Brady, to come on, is a medical emergency, similar to what we saw already during the COVID lockdowns in 22 and thereafter. I certainly think that there's a lot we could learn from these lessons. And as we learn from these lessons, maybe even ask ourselves if something like this could happen again. So before we get started on this particular topic, Tim, I'd like to let our audience get to know you a little bit. So if you would just maybe introduce yourself, tell us a little about yourself, your own background, your profession, your faith, anything like that you might think might be relevant to our viewers.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, educated in the public schools. I went on to our local university and took a bachelor's degree in political science. After a few years, I went back and completed the requirements for medical school, attended medical school. After medical school, I spent a year in a full-time in a mission in Mexico. Then I came back to the United States and did a 1-year general internship. After that, I went back for another year in mission work. Then I came back again and began active clinical practice in this country. Working while I was medical director of a state penitentiary, I contracted to the United States Army, and I was in clinical practice in rural New Mexico, all of those at the same time. And at that time, they opened up a master's degree in public health program here in El Paso, and I attended that program. I was actually the first graduate of that program here in El Paso. From there, I went on and did a residency in occupational medicine. And from there, I was offered a clinical faculty position, at the University of Texas Health Center in Tyler, Texas. I think germane to our conversation today, one of the experiences I had during that residency, while I was on clinical faculty, epidemiologists are hard to come by, and our epidemiologist became gravely ill. And so I want to make clear that I'm not an epidemiologist, but in the curriculum for the Masters in Public Health, we had to take a bit of epidemiology, and I enjoyed epidemiology, so I volunteered to teach the program. It was impossible to find at that time to find an epidemiologist, and it was just a basic course in epidemiology, but it was taught at the master's level for Stephen F. Austin. Our department taught a master's course for Stephen F. Austin State University. So I did have that, I would call it minimal, maybe moderate experience in at least teaching epidemiology, although I'm not an epidemiologist. I retired from the university in 2006, continued to work in rural New Mexico through 2019. I never officially retired, but this may come out as we talk about this. Really, the whole COVID phenomenon is really what sort of ended my active clinical practice in medicine, although I never retired officially.
Well, just to make sure we haven't lost any of our viewers, including myself, for those of us who don't know too much, excuse our ignorance, what exactly is epidemiology?
Oh, epidemiology. Good question. How do I put that simply? Epidemiology at its basic level, I would describe it, a real epidemiologist might wince at this. I would describe it as a means of evaluating the distribution, the spread, the impact of a particular disease or condition across a population.
Okay. I see why you say it's so germane to our conversation today. Um, well, thanks for that extensive background. Yes, I would say, just from my own end, one of the real reasons why I asked you to come on board is obviously you're a medical doctor, so you know a lot more
Actually,
about these things.
an osteopathic physician. I want to make that clear. Um,
Thank you.
those of us who are osteopathic physicians are kind of proud of that. So,
Good for the specificity. And I mean, in general, I know you. I know you are a Catholic of good faith, a man of goodwill. I have a great deal of respect just for your own journey in faith. You have helped me a lot. I mean, if any of the viewers are interested in this sort of thing, um, many of you might know that I attend the Latin Mass, but I credit a few people for really helping open my eyes to this and bring me on board to where I'm at in my own path of faith. And you were one of those, so I am always going to be very grateful to you for helping, helping me learn a lot about my faith. So, given all of this, you are obviously a man that I respect, admire, and trust a great deal. You've got some great life experiences. We probably won't get into too many of your life stories, but there are a few people I enjoy sitting across from more and just hearing him talk about things he has done and places he has been than Dr. Brady. But in this particular case, it's because of the COVID, the vaccine, and all the things that happened with this lockdown in 2020. As I have been, living through it, as we all have, you have taught me a lot. You have sent me things to read, and I think out of all the people I know, kind of on a personal level, you're probably the best educated on this. Not to say that you're, the world expert or anything like that, but again, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking to discuss this with the high level intellectuals that, this is their big profession. I'm looking to discuss this with someone whom I could sit across, a coffee at a coffee shop and just kind of talk, like, help me out here. Like, what is going on? What have we seen? Does this make sense? And what might be coming? And I think a lot of our viewers are going to be in that situation. And I think you can speak very well to that. So um, that's why I've asked you on, Tim. And with that, I'd like to just jump into my first question. And that's if we could sort of just step back into early 2020, given all the experience you've told us, your lifelong background in general medical practices, as these mandates started rolling out, what were you seeing? Did this make sense to you from what you've learned and your practice, your experience?
well, I think that we'll talk about some of the nuts and bolts of the whole thing. But this is really one of the points that if I could only drive home 2 or 3 points in this talk, this would be one of them. So prior to the mandates, of course, was the whole um, uh, evolution of the phenomenon. Even before the mandates, came out a little bit later on. First, we started to hear the news of of this particular virus that had apparently originated in China. The mandates came a little bit later on. But back to that point that I'd like to drive home, and I think I'll get to that point that I want to drive home a little bit further on. My earliest experience with this, I had been actually out of the country. I left the United States in September of 2019, which was my last month in active clinical practice. I didn't know that at the time. And I was working with a Franciscan convent in the Republic of Guatemala, and so I had spent about 4 months, just being in that convent and working there, and so I was vaguely aware that there was talk about this virus in China. I didn't pay much attention to it. Didn't have much contact with the outside world, although maybe I'd go into town and see a newspaper or something like that. But I returned to the country in early February, which is really a propitious time for this. And I have to say, it was maybe the day I returned, or maybe the second day I was back. A friend of mine emailed me, and he had a lot of curiosity about this particular virus and how seriously it should be taken and this sort of thing. And I responded to him that I really knew nothing about it. But the way these things go in this day and age, if you'll give somebody a couple of weeks kind of look into it, you can at least hum a few bars. You can at least get on the page and get an idea of what's going on. And that's what I did. I said, well, give me a couple weeks. Let me look into this. And that's when I began to pay attention to it. As you've already alluded to, and I want to emphasize this. So it would be deceptive to describe myself, and I don't want to do that, as somebody that's at the tip of the spear of this whole thing. I was and I remain only interested in picking up enough pertinent information to suit my own needs and to be able to advise people properly about this. So I'm not at the tip of the spear. But I'm paying attention to those people who are at the tip of the spear. There's a whole long list of respectable, accomplished authorities who've done a much deeper dive into all this than I have. And I've simply gleaned information from these sources. So anyway, back to the early COVID experience. And here I'll talk about that. This addresses your question. One of the points that I'd like to drive home to your listeners is this is an observation that I can call my own, although I'm not the only one to come up with this. Many others noted this early on, and how to say this to get this across. I use the analogy of my good friend, who you know, the auto mechanic. If I take my car to the auto mechanic because I want an oil change, and he accidentally reaches over and grabs a can of automatic transmission fluid and puts it in my crankcase, well, darn it. But that's an honest mistake, right? If, however, he pours a jar of honey into my crankcase, that's on purpose. What I want to drive home is that these were not simple mistakes. Violations occurred of elementary principles of patient care, epidemiology, and public health. Because these are first year, public health 101 principles that were violated. This is how it was obvious to me from the very beginning that this was purposeful. Experts make errors, commit errors regarding complicated topics, but they don't make errors concerning elementary principles of their fields. So this was purposeful, and that was obvious from the start.
On that note, I just want to emphasize that as well and ask a quick, short follow up question. That's that my understanding is, again, you're saying, given the reactions that were taking place, which may have included some of these various rules and mandates, procedures that were being employed, it was clear that this wasn't just an accidental mistake that someone in the medical profession could make, but rather they intentionally knew that this was not the right procedures. This was violating like all the common experience that they had, all the knowledge that they had, and therefore these were the wrong steps to take. And it didn't make sense that so many people were taking the similar wrong steps, right? Can you give us any example of maybe one or two of such things?
Well, it depends on, we can talk about the field of public health or we can talk about the field of medical care. Let's just take one example. Okay, let's take an example in the field of public health. The first thing that in a public health, let's call it crisis. I'm of the opinion that this was never a crisis until it was turned into a crisis. You want to do what you can to honestly allay fear. If you need to bring things to the attention of the people, you do that, but you don't create panic. Panic is something you want to avoid. And if you'll go back to the very early days of this, you'll find that even some of those names that we tout about all the time, who we see as the villains in this thing, in the early days, they were trying to allay fear, and that's what you do. Because once you instill fear and panic in a population, then you lose the game. Let's put it like that. So that's just one of many examples in the field of public health. There's, another is that failure to, and this is kind of jumping ahead, but when you apply a measure to an entire population, you stratify the risk. In other words, you say, okay, this particular part of the population is susceptible to this, not the entire population. And you aim your directives at that high risk group. You don't aim it at the entire population. That's an elementary principle. In the topic of public health is very different from individual healthcare patients. They're two completely different fields with some relation to each other. But so talking about just taking care of an individual patient, ever since this is part of medical ethics. Ever since, let's say, the Nuremberg trials, that's when it was really driven home. We have to give informed consent to our patients. If I am going to propose or impose a particular treatment on you, then I have to be able to describe to you, I have to know about that, and I have to describe it to you so that you understand it to the best of your ability and my ability. Well, there was no way to do that in the case of this injection that we were giving to people. We could not provide informed consent because we didn't have the information. That's just one of the very basic elementary principles of individual healthcare. So those are a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. Elementary principles. There's a lot of them, but that's a couple of them.
I mean, I'll ask one, and this is just, me again. I have no knowledge of these things in particular, but from, I mean, I do have some science background because I was studying electrical engineering, and so I've studied chemistry and biology and some of these things too, just at the college level. But I always thought it was very odd and strange. It didn't make any sense to me, like all these mandates with regard to the 6 feet separations and the mask wearing. Because I mean, I had understood that these particles were so small that if they get through, that a simple mask doesn't prevent them. To me, and that's where I resonate with what you said. These ideas to me were just part of instilling fear, not letting people sort of like communicate with each other. It's so important that we see ourselves face to face. The distance between ourselves, like isolation and alienation of people. That's what I thought it was affecting, and I didn't think it had any real physical benefits, medical benefits, and by and large, as much as I could, I refused to participate in any of those things. I mean, are those examples too? Is this something you would say is?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and there's a lot of points in what you just said. The first thing is, I mean, when we finally get to talking about how to approach these sorts of things in the future, I mean, the first thing is use your common sense. My gosh, yeah, these measures were absolutely absurd, and what it was is theater. It was theater.
And yet, there has to have been a purpose. So here, I'm just going to ask you to speculate yourself. Um, why do you think, especially like I say, what really also struck me as so strange, and people have commented on this, it seemed like everybody was operating off the same playbook. And by everybody, I mean like every country in the world. And there's never, as far as I know, been a phenomenon where such diverse countries, diverse people, all sort of seem to be doing like everything in lockstep. And that again was a big thing to me, like you're saying, just common sense. That just didn't make. It was like this is bizarre. Um, so then, if they're all, I mean, you might assume there is that playbook that somebody's issuing. You don't know who, but what's the purpose? I mean, if somebody's got that and they're issuing it, what might be the reason that these things were being mandated? Do you have any insights into that? And I understand I'm asking you to speculate.
Yeah.
You don't know, but what could be a reason?
So, first comment I would have to what you just said is that what you said is largely true. That countries fell into lockstep. I think this was largely true in Asia, Europe, um, uh, Australia, New Zealand, the United States. But there were certain exceptions, and those exceptions are important to take a look at. And they were also dangerous to these people that were purveying this particular program. One exception would be Sweden, which refused to lock down and refused to go into lockstep. I don't know why. But the others are many of the African countries that refused portions of the whole agenda. The reason that's dangerous to the people promoting this agenda is because it provides you with a control group.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody was on the same page, then there would be nothing to compare to. But in this case, we do have a control group, nations that didn't go along with some or all of the program. Sweden being one, African nations being another. So anyway, I lost track of the real question you asked. Why the why behind it? Well, I have enough people out there putting a tinfoil hat on me anyway, and I don't really, I don't know that. I'll kind of leave that to other people to decide. Again, use your common sense. Take a look at this. Take a look at the people who are pushing this, what they themselves say, what they themselves are suggesting. Yes, but I think there's no
All right.
Yeah.
So let me float an idea that I have by you, and just to see if you think it sticks. My own thought was, I mean, because frankly, I thought it was ridiculous, especially because the same experts who had, or some of the same experts who had said you should wear the mask, just you could find still, audio footage and written records where they were saying this wouldn't make any, this wouldn't help. So you don't flip like that. You're an expert on this medical field and you're saying this thing, and the whole medical establishment is saying one thing, and you flip. So I thought, well, this makes no common sense. So to me, what it reminded me of is going back to like the school playground, where the big bully just kind of tells people to do something that is stupid just to see how much power he has over them, right? And if they don't go along, he can threaten to punish them, to beat them up, whatever. And then, of course, some of them do, and maybe one doesn't. But he also sort of identifies who's the other, alpha dog in the group who doesn't kind of want to go along with him. And so I thought this is really strange because all it seems to be doing is making us do stupid things that are against common sense. And so it shows how much control you have over people. How much can you help? How much can you make people deviate from their common sense and go against what is in their own best interests? Like seeing their kids' faces and breathing normally. And how much can you just kind of convince them, almost like like a mind game. How much can you control their mind and make them see reality in a different way? And then obviously you're going to get a good idea of who is easy to control, who isn't, things of that sort. Because like the thing that still surprises me is every now and then I'll go into a store, I'm driving down the street, and there's still some people wearing masks, and I want to reach out to them and kind of shake them and say, those things don't work. Have you not figured this out? Now in their case, maybe there's a political ideology or some other stuff going on, but I mean, I'm not sure what common sense they have. So, yeah, I mean, is that viable? Does that
It
make any
is.
sense, or do I have too big of a tinfoil hat myself?
No, I think that to use your metaphor, and we'll get into this later. I think when we talk about solutions or how to deal with this in the future, that bully on the playground, that person who stands up to that bully, bullies are cowards, and that person that stands up to that bully, the bully is more than likely harboring a lot of fear about that particular person. And I think that's going to be germane to what we talk about a little later on when we talk about solutions. Um, no, but I think that this was a test run. I think they gathered a lot of information. Um, I don't expect this to be the last run that they take. I don't know what the next one will look like. It may not have anything to do with health, maybe something else. I don't know. But I think they gather a lot of information from this. So yes, I think that you're right on about it. As to those people who are still wearing masks, I see the same thing, but I have to tell you, I have a lot of compassion for them because those people have been traumatized.
Good point. No, good point. All right. So obviously, in addition to the virus, a proposed solution at the time was the jab. Did you counsel for, against it? Why?
So I fully expected that that would be the next step, and you didn't have to be a Rhodes Scholar to know that. You could see it coming. I think I paid a lot of attention to the very name of the program, Warp Speed. And in this conversation that I've had with colleagues, medical colleagues, I've just asked them, let them answer the own question. My gosh, how long does it take to bring a vaccine or any medical product to market? It takes years. It can take a decade or longer to bring that product to market. Because there are supposedly, we're learning now that it's not quite as pristine as we've been told it was, but supposedly there are safety studies that are done, and then different levels of trials on the way to bringing this product to market. So the very name Warp Speed should get your attention. Now, how is a physician, I don't understand this part. How is a physician going to trust a product that's brought to market in a matter of months under the name of warp speed. And are you really, and this is a new technology not used in human beings prior to this, are you really going to suggest to your patients that they use this product? Especially, and we can talk about this later on, especially in light of, because everything in life, really, we don't think about it like this, but everything in healthcare or public health is a risk benefit decision. You're always making that decision. So really, we were looking at, when you really look at the health impact, and I know this is going to go against whatever, people who are tuned into, you know, mainstream media are going to have a different idea about this, but really the epidemiologic impact of this particular virus was at the most moderate. I would say minimal, depending again on the particular group at risk. To some groups, it was zero. So anyway, you had a very low risk for most people, for almost everybody, from this virus. Yet you are going to inject this product into every single one of your patients. Now, I don't know how many people are aware of this, but every medical product like that, including a vaccine, you get the little box the vaccine comes in. You take the vial out, and in there's folded up this package insert. And that package insert basically describes all the parameters of this medication, how it's to be used, the pharmacodynamics, the pharmacokinetics of this particular product, what the risks, what the adverse effects have been. Well, the package insert is blank. So everything that I am required to share with my patients as part of informed consent, how am I going to share that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was blank. So I cannot provide informed consent. It's impossible. That's a bar I can't get over, and that's a principle of medical ethics. So at any rate, how can I describe the risk to a patient? There's a risk if I give you an aspirin. How can I describe the risk to somebody if I don't know what the risk is?
Wow.
In the case of and you're comparing that to the risk of this virus, which I'm saying in particular populations was rounds off to zero.
So, moving now to today, it seems to me from things that have crossed my desk and the internet that I've read, that at least the conversations are opening up a little bit more. That various studies have been done, or some studies are being published that perhaps weren't before. We're 4 or 5 years, it seems, removed from some of this. Obviously, we've got RFK Jr. as part of the president's cabinet staff there, and he's I think helping opening some of this stuff up. But I would say that most of us, rank and file, lay people, are happy it's over and have not really kept up with much of the research or much of what's going on. Um, can you tell me of some of the things that you've read that maybe some of these studies are showing with regard, especially to the vaccine and the boosters that people received? Are there any studies? Are any conclusions being drawn? Where does it look like the data is showing when it's actually analyzed correctly?
First comment I would have is that it's not over. This was a test run. It's not over. And so that's why we need to be aware and be prepared. Yes, there's a lot more information coming out now, but I don't have a good handle on because I kind of live in a bubble. Um, the people that I'm surrounded by are, I think, largely as aware as I am, if not more aware of what's going on. But I don't really have a good handle on the larger population. I would hope that your audience is already, I would hope that everything that I'm saying is not new to your audience. So I don't really have a good handle on that. Um, but if you are paying attention, yes, the information is clear. Now, more information is coming out. It's all over the place. So, one thing I could say to kind of sum it up, one thing that is very clear is that this particular product, this product that they're calling a vaccine, has what's called a negative efficacy, which doesn't mean it has no efficacy. It means that let's just look at the condition that this product is supposed to address, which is SARS-CoV-2. The likelihood of a person um, contracting SARS-CoV-2 increases based on how many of these injections they have taken. So it's a
Wow.
negative efficacy. We know that. On the safety side of it, that's awful clear as well. Now, it's they have you in sort of a catch-22 because they're not going to do they criticize the types of studies or observations, well, that come to these conclusions. The thing is, they are not going to allocate the resources to do the types of studies that would be necessary to just simply answer the question truthfully. They're not going to, they don't, that's not something they want to do. And so at this point, we are limited to, you know, I'm not saying these are poor quality studies. I'm saying that they're not of the highest level of quality. You know, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. They're not. They're not. That's not going to happen. But based on what we do, your good information, we know these things. We know that we know the dangers, many of the dangers, not all of them, because at this point, what do we know? We know what the dangers are 5 years out. If we want to know what the dangers are 10 years out, ask me in 5 more years. Right?
Well, and my worry on that is that it's going to be that much more and so much later to maybe stop things. Again, this is a very, very simple statement, and maybe I'm generalizing too much, but this has sort of been one of my takeaways. And again, I just want to get your comment on it. I am of the opinion that taking the vaccine would have been a far greater physical danger to me, that was posed by the vaccine, than I was ever under by the COVID virus itself. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Yeah. So the solution being proposed here, as you said, actually was making it worse. So where did these things come from? I guess that's the other question I come. You want to trace things back to their origins. We heard a lot of different stories, and some of that I think has been challenged. And I think, again, here you get into conspiracy theories. So I don't know if you have thoughts or if you've read or if you care to share on that. But I know at some point in time, people were talking about how this was a natural thing, the virus, like some bat poop in a cave. I don't know. You got all these crazy stories, which I think are pretty outlandish, even when they were being floated out there. And others, of course, have suggested that they were man-made, perhaps even at university labs in the United States. North Carolina, the Tar Heels come to mind. Obviously, the Wuhan lab comes to mind. Yeah, I mean, do you have any insights into what you think is most probable regarding the origin of either COVID, that virus, or the vaccine?
Right. Well, the SARS-CoV-2 um, is not a naturally occurring virus. We can know that.
Okay.
That's known. Um, uh, it was produced in a lab. We know that. We know that because of the amino acid structure of SARS-CoV-2. And there's a substitution at the what's called the furin cleavage site of the virus. Substitution of a man-made amino acid for a natural amino acid. So we know that it. I mean, and we knew this early on. I mean, this did not come from a pangolin or a bat or a wet market in Wuhan. This was created in a lab. Um, the real question there is, okay, was the release accidental or was it purposeful? And everyone's entitled to their own viewpoint on that. Okay, that was one of the questions you asked me. The virus itself, the the product being labeled as a vaccine. How in the world were they able to produce this product in a matter of months? Well, it's becoming more obvious, and I think I can state this that this product had already been produced and it was already stockpiled and it was ready for release. So that's where and yeah, you mentioned the University of North Carolina. That's the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, EcoHealth Alliance under Ralph Barrick. Yeah, so gain of research, function research is a biological warfare agenda. End of story. There are a few other good reasons for that, but it was a biological warfare agenda.
Do you know the? I've heard that term, and I'm glad you put it that simply because actually I'm not sure I knew that. Do you know why it's called what it is? Gain of research function. I
Gain of
don't
function
understand those
research.
terms.
Gain of function.
Oh,
Gain of function.
gain of function.
Well, it's just as the name implies. It is artificial ways of manipulating a, chain of amino acids, which is what a virus is, in such a way as to make that that product more dangerous to a population. Its virulence, its ability to spread,
I see.
its effect on the population, and this stems from biological warfare research.
I see.
So the and I'm not going to know the entire story, but along with the University of North Carolina, there is, and this is probably closer to the source. A lot of this research was being carried on at the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratory in Fort Detrick, Maryland. Now, people are under the impression that gain of function research was outlawed during the Obama administration, but it was not.
Right.
But it was made more difficult. And when it was made more difficult, some of these places like Fort Detrick and North Carolina, Rocky Mountain Labs in Colorado, sort of farmed this research out to laboratories that could do the same sort of research outside of the country. These laboratories are around the world. They're built with your tax dollars. They're carrying on the same sort of research for the same sort of purposes, but outside of the United States. So that's.
I mean, I've heard that some of those were even like in the Ukraine, or maybe a
Correct.
significant number of them.
The number I have heard is 18 or 19 of them in the Ukraine itself, which was, obviously of a concern to Russia to have those. I mean, I can imagine here in El Paso, if we had these sorts of laboratories across the border in Chihuahua, we'd be pretty concerned. So anyway, that was a concern for Russia.
And is the Wuhan lab one of those? In other words, if you have all these Wuhan labs in your neighborhood or in your country, and then like you're saying, we don't know if this was intentional or unintentional, but regardless, even if it was unintentional, it's in your neighborhood and it's going to hit you hard fast first.
Yeah. So the Wuhan lab was largely built with your tax dollars.
Wow. Okay, so one question I've noticed that you, I know this about you too. You do like to choose your words as carefully or as specifically as you can. And several times already in this interview, maybe I'm being sloppy or just using the common terminology. So I keep talking about this thing like a vaccine, and you have carefully said the product. Is there something there? Is there a reason why you're using this term, or there's a distinction I should be drawing from this?
Well, okay. I don't even know how to spell vaccinologist, much less am I a vaccinologist. Um, Typically, a vaccine is supposed to work. The described mechanism of action is that you inject a part of a virus that can either be inactivated, in some cases, live virus that's somehow been altered, or part of a virus into a person to stimulate that person's immune system to react against those proteins. In this particular case, this is messenger RNA that's enclosed in a lipid capsule. That lipid capsule allows that messenger RNA to attach to a cell wall, then thereby penetrate that cell wall, and then to attach to the nuclear wall membrane, enter that nucleus, and turn that the cells of your body, into we could say a little factory, which then creates this spike protein and releases it. So instead of injecting the person with the parts of that virus itself, you are injecting them with messenger RNA, which then causes the cells to produce the product that it's intended to have the immune system react against.
So let me just make this really. I'm going to simplify it, I think, for my own self, what I'm understanding, and then you correct me if I'm right or wrong here in what I'm trying to say. So what I'm getting is that when you use what's supposed to be called a vaccine, it is basically just getting your own, let's say, your own natural, what you have in your own body, the way God has made us, to fight a particular disease. Whereas with this product, it's actually changing like my genetic code in my cells to make it do something that it's not normally gonna do. And so that's why they're very different. Is that correct?
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
That does sound pretty somewhat frightening. Wow. Okay. So I think I've already got some pieces here to my next question, because I mean, I'll give you the question, then I'll just mention some of the pieces I've seen. I have heard it now being said, and I wasn't hearing this earlier, but I've heard it more now, that some people have speculated that this was a kind of military operation. And I just kind of want to get your take on this. What I'm hearing is things like we've said already, how governments were in uniform, cohesion on some of these things, how we went against our common sense and didn't practice things normally. So there's got to be like this power on high kind of forcing that. This idea that these things are being made in labs and they're not natural made, and then they can get sent offshore. Well, there's got to be a fair amount of money behind it. You even mentioned a U.S. Army base here, a medical facility there. So, I mean, just a lot of things that we've sort of been sort of touching on here and there in the discussion has kind of, each time we've mentioned one, like a light's going off, I'm like, maybe that fits into that picture and gives more credence to people saying that. Is there credence to that? Do you think it's viable? Was this a military operation? Do we know anything about that?
We do, and it was. This takes us back to the beginning of our conversation, where elementary principles of public health and patient care were violated. And I was asking myself at this time, and I was making the comment, I was saying, this doesn't look like public health. This doesn't look like patient care. Nothing I was ever trained in. It doesn't look like it. And now I can answer that. It doesn't look like it because it wasn't that. This was not a public health agenda. It's a military and intelligence community operation. Do we have good evidence for that? We have excellent evidence for that. And for that, what I would prefer to do, because I'm not coming up with this on my own. I'm paying close attention to people who are putting the time into researching this. And I would like for your audience, for the benefit of your audience, just to mention, if they're more interested in this, uh, people should question everything I say. People should look this up on their own. Um, those people who have done the work and done the deep dive on this, and if you'll allow me, I'd like to just mention three people that your readers, if they or your listeners, if they have interest in, can reference. One would be Debbie Lehrman. Debbie Lehrman is a journalist with the Brownstone Institute. She has done a lot of research into this, and she has described it. I've kept her book out here. I'll show it to your listeners, and I suggest reading this if you want a little more insight into this book by Debbie Lehrman. Another person would be Sasha Latipova. Sasha Latipova is doing excellent work on this. And in fact, Lehrman and Latipova have come out with this is a document that if your readers will access this document, your listeners will access this document, this is all explained. And that document is known as the COVID dossier. And they can look that up by putting that in their search bar. COVID dossier, Lehrman and Latipova. Latipova is an MBA who spent her entire career working with pharmaceutical companies, specifically in the drug safety of bringing drugs and vaccines to market. So she understands the nuts and bolts of all that. And Latipova has done excellent work in this area. And finally, this is one that I would, if you want to see how all this was done legally, they should reference Catherine Watt. Catherine Watt is a paralegal. She therefore is very steeped in legal research and how you do legal research. And she has gone back and documented how the legal framework for all of this was put in place going back decades. This has been going on for a long time. Catherine Watt happens to be a traditional Catholic. And so, yes, it's very clear that this, and if you'll read this book and you'll read these people, you will find out that this was not a public health agenda. Public health authorities were the face of it, but they were, in essence, puppets of the military and intelligence communities. And that's what's behind this.
Wow. So that, I think, is making more sense to me now of a statement you made earlier, which we'll get to here in a minute with lessons learned. But this idea that you said this was a trial run where we should expect it again, but it may have a very different face.
Yeah.
And you don't know which face it's going to be, because if it is in fact an operation that has more of the military intelligence or the intelligence communities, the military action, then they might be able to select any number of faces for it. This was the public health face, as you said. They were the face of it. Wow. So that is. So then again, this is very possible part of sort of like this plan to issue in a kind of a new world order, a global reset. People have been talking about 2029 as a deadline, that things will be different then. You won't own anything. People that are the global elitists certainly would have maybe some of the power behind the scenes to pull some of these levers, and it kind of could fit that sort of picture, I imagine. So let me.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Enough said. Enough said there. Here then is, now I'll throw a number of things here at, and then you can comment as well. And these are my takes, but obviously I'm going to kind of bring this back to Fatima. And Our Lady prophesied, as I said at the beginning of the show, the annihilation of nations. And so I think it's natural for every kind of generation to be interpreting these phrases in terms of what they know. Like I was saying in the Cold War, everyone kind of thought, well, the nuclear war, which is certainly not out of the picture. But maybe now there are these more nuanced and sophisticated ways. Um, Obviously, if there is a kind of global reset or a real restructuring of the way men live here on this earth, this global reset, and people have not hidden this agenda that vast portions of the population need to die, which then enables them to control the others more effectively. And that, of course, dovetails with prophecies that Our Lady has made. I mean, for example, at Akita, she did talk about fire falling from the sky, which could be supernatural, which is what I think, but it could also involve natural elements, and that so many, huge portions, a third or so of mankind could be wiped out, where the living even envy the dead, maybe more. So I see these words of Our Lady, which some people might think were just sensational or made up. But with all these sort of things taking place in our world today, they're far less far fetched. And there's more ways that these things can come about than just, the nuclear weaponry. And the other thing that obviously where I came at this even more, the whole COVID thing, maybe the way it affected me most directly and most personally is, and what was a great disappointment and sadness, and for many, is just sort of how it wasn't just the governments that were lockstep with this, but it was the Catholic Church as well. We had the Vatican and Pope Francis and all the bishops. They shut down the churches. They shut down the mass. They shut down the sacraments. I mean, things that we're talking about here that matter the most. I always say, I mean, one thing matters to save your soul, and how important it is, for example, to have confession, especially to have the last rites. There's no cataclysm in my mind in the world that should ever prevent priests from trying to get people confession in the last rites, because our eternity depends on this. And yet we were shutting all these things down. We weren't letting children get baptized. It was really, really bizarre, really disheartening. And I think, a hidden grace there was that many people discovered about the traditional Latin Mass, because a lot of times it was just the priests of the Latin Mass that, were doing things to bring the sacraments to the people. So all of this, though, sort of leads me to think that, well, if it was an operation being done and all these governments were in cahoots or lockstep, and the church was there too, that infiltration is very, very big, and it's affected every level. And then that again connects me with the message of Fatima, because Our Lady does talk in that message, especially the third secret. I did a show recently on that, but a big theme, I would say the major theme of the third secret is, in addition to obviously the loss of many souls into hell, is the apostasy within the church that will begin at the highest levels.
Yep.
And so, like, all these pieces are kind of falling into place for me. If you just see it from the secular side, you're getting one view. And in fact, by the way, I meant to mention all those names you mentioned and links in the books. If you'll send them to me later on, like in an email, I will attach them to the show notes. So for all our viewers, you can go below and you'll see some links and some names and some titles that Dr. Brady is referring to. But that's just like from the secular side. And I think a lot of times they miss what I would say is the spiritual side, which is always much deeper. But I'm kind of getting both, and I see a confluence, and that's what really convicts me of a lot of these things. So that's sort of my little summary take on it. Your thoughts, your comments, anything you might add, correct, adjust?
Well, I would accuse myself of being one of those people who often neglects to see the spiritual side of this, because I'm so focused on, let's say, the medical or public health or social or political side of all these things. But always at the back of my mind, and I think what you say is absolutely true. I mean, if you could only think of one measure to take, of one solution, or how you protect yourself in the long run, well, the only thing that's important is the salvation of our souls and that of our families. And so stay close to the sacraments, remain in a state of grace. And that's always at the back of my mind, although always in the front of my mind are the things that I'm professionally trained to address or address through interest. Like I say, my original degree was in political science, and I've never lost my love and interest for that. So I'm always geared in that direction, and not at least consciously or upfront is geared to the spiritual side. But you're absolutely right. That's at the base of everything.
So really, what this all maybe leads up to, my last and most important question. In the past, maybe in years past, all of this would have been taboo, and we couldn't even be talking about it. And of course, it would have been labeled as false misinformation, false narratives, and that doesn't seem to have as much currency now because of some of the things that have come to light. But what I do think is the most important step is what lessons can we learn from this? Because as you've already indicated, this you expect it to happen again. I frankly expect it to happen again. Also, again, not sure what mode. As you've kind of made me look at it a little differently. It may not be medical, certainly in my mind, but this is for another show. But I was going to throw it out there because maybe we'll talk about it later. Is like just the whole artificial intelligence idea, how that's going to play into things. I know a lot of people, again, touching it with the Message of Fatima, which deals with the book of the Apocalypse. Sister Lucia told us that. And one of the things we see is when the dragon comes with the beast of the sea and the beast of the land, is that the people receive the mark of a beast. And it turns out that no one can sort of conduct any business. No one can sort of live in the society who doesn't have the mark of the beast. And that's what compels so many people to accept it. And it's going to take a lot of resistance and a lot of fortitude to resist this. So then everybody, but this has been going on for centuries, has been speculating as to what the mark of the beast is. And I personally don't get into that as much because I just see it kind of every new thing becomes possibly the mark of the beast. So when we were getting these vaccine passports, people were telling me that's going to be the mark of the beast. If you don't have the vaccine passport, it's not going to work. People are talking now about the digital ID, and you're not going to be able to transact anything without this because they won't know if you're fake, a bot, whatever. And so that's the mark of the beast. Those are all types, I guess. They all kind of maybe fit the bill. I don't know what it is. God will reveal it in his time, but these things should sort of, we should, I think, pick up our antennas, our spiritual antennas to these things. So, I mean, long way of just asking my question is, if we have something else like this, more intense, more tyrannical, to possibly bring about this new global order, a new reset, it can't happen again. I think we're sure about that. But what lessons can we learn from this? Any advice you can give me and our listeners?
Well, I share your same concerns. The advice that I would give, of course, I said this earlier. The first thing is to stay in a state of grace, stay close to the sacraments. That's really, if you eliminate everything else we've talked about, that's ultimately the important thing. But it's not the only important thing. I mean, no one wants to see their families suffer. And I fully expect more of this. If you're talking about people accepting, let's say, a digital ID or use of digital currency, and you wonder how that's going to turn out, well, go back to what you said about the mask. How did they accept that? How did they accept the 6 foot distance? How did they accept not going to Thanksgiving with your family or visiting your dying grandmother in the nursing home? They all accepted that. We need to learn from this experience, and what we need to do is just say no. We need to resist. That again, the bully on the playground. You resist. You have to do that. Now you ask yourself if you will actually do that. And if I'm forced to use a digital currency, am I going to say no? If to get my Social Security check, I have to get a digital ID, am I going to say no? We'll see. We'll see what we're all made of at that time. But I think that we do need to resist. And God help me. That's what I hope I'll be able to do, if and when this thing that we expect rears its head. But I would say I think it's very important to begin to network with other people. If we're going to resist, I think we need to be networking with other people, like-minded people, for all kinds of reasons. Because if we're not able to use the currency that we've been used to using, or we're cut off from our bank account or whatever, I have no clue how it's going to come down. We're going to need resources, and we're going to need to help each other. We're going to need to develop communities. back to the topic of resisting, and back to your topic of the bully on the playground. I think we need to keep well in mind the perpetrators of this whole COVID scam, for instance, and whatever's to come in the future. Frankly, these people, they are sociopaths. They're at least sociopaths. And some of them are psychopaths. They don't think like the rest of us think. They're not motivated by the things that the rest of us are motivated by. They're a tiny minority of the whole population. They have an inordinate amount of power. They're attracted to this power. We've been willing to allow them to accrue all this power while we've been busy with the real things of life, our faith, our families, our friends, our work, our hobbies, our recreation. But we vastly outnumber these sociopaths. And I think that, like the bully on the playground, they're really threatened by this. And so the extent to which we resist these various agendas of theirs, I think we will meet with more success. Now, we're likely to suffer. I think we need to expect to suffer. It's just going to be part of it. But I think especially parents really need to prepare their children for this in a very prudent way. Nobody knows your children like you do, so prepare them. Not to make fear part of it, but to make awareness part of it. I mean, you prepare your children by telling them to look both ways before they cross the street, to not run off from mama at the grocery store. Well, do you do this because you've got a tinfoil hat on? No. You do it because it's prudent. And have we not had enough examples now of the prudence of being skeptical about this kind of stuff, of making our children aware of this kind of stuff, so that as they move into the future, as they get older and mature and able to handle this kind of information, they can know these very real dangers, like the bus coming down the street, or the bad guy in the store that might do you harm. We can't leave this to somebody else. Ultimately, it's going to come down to each one of us individually. And we set that example for the children and for other people around us, but especially for the children. So if we give in, our children are more likely to give in as well. So we have to set that example of courage for them. We can't leave it to somebody else to do. I think this is what it's going to come down to.
Thank you, Tim. No, those are all really, really great words. I like what you said in the show. I mean, keep a hold of your common sense, work on networking, building those communities, resources. One thing I thought that I was going to ask, but I think it's just kind of been answered with that network in the communities, is I think a lot of what played a role in this, and I can't imagine they're not going to use it again, is, let's say, just the media, especially the smartphones and the instant media that everybody, it's like they're plugged into nowadays. And so those who can control the media can certainly spin the narrative, can strike fear, can move masses of people in a particular direction. And I think for sure the use of media and misinformation with the narrative that they want to push will be a play. That might even have been what this was sort of like a test balloon for. How far can we get just going against common sense if we give the media? I think it was, it's one of Hitler's, the guys who did the propaganda, was it Goebbels or the other guy? But he basically said, if you lie enough, doesn't matter how big the lie, make the lie as big as you want, just keep saying it over and over again and louder, and people eventually believe it, even though kind of like in their gut, they knew it was a big lie. They believe the big lie, so make the lie big. But you need the media for that. So I do counsel people, do your best to stay away from that, because the more you hear that, it influences you every time you hear it. And yet, if you got to trust your people, the network you have, and get your communication from the right places, because otherwise you go down the rabbit hole with the rest of the people who lose their common sense.
Yeah. For years in my medical practice, this doesn't sound like really like medical advice, but for my patients who were complaining of, let's say, depression. Well, among other things that I would talk to them about, I would suggest that they get rid of their televisions. And I was also counseling that a lot to people during this whole. They were saying, "Well, I can't figure out what the truth is. I don't know what the truth is." I said, "Well, there's some things you can do, to get you closer to the truth. And one of the most, and this is the metaphor I would use. One of the best things you can do if you want to sort of sort through all that information out there is you take your television, you put it in a dumpster, and you put a brick through the screen so it can't hurt anybody else. And then you go from there, and all of a sudden, the truth will start to become a little bit more clear to you." So yes, you're right. The media is done. It's in the tank. When I was a young kid in elementary school, they would teach us the horrors of the Soviet Union. And one of those horrors of the Soviet Union was that all of the media in the Soviet Union was controlled. That was a horror of the Soviet Union. And now we live in the same reality in our own country. So what they warned me against when I was 10 now is what we live in the middle of. So yes, the media is not to be trusted at all.
That's another error of Russia, for sure.
Well, okay. Yep. Yeah, there you go.
Well said. My last statement on this, and then if you have any final words, and it's something you said, because I don't want to end without saying this. It struck me when you talked about how some of these individuals, very small in number, but with a lot of inordinate amount of power, are sociopaths and psychopaths. In my own kind of experience, again, coming at it from the theological side and the religious spiritual side, that's very often obviously associated with the devil, with diabolical activity and with the occult. And for me, that is the bottom line. Ultimately, for anyone who has faith, realize that ultimately this is the devil behind all of this. We are dealing with principalities and powers. And so ultimately, the big solutions will also be spiritual. And I take comfort, but also notice. I'm aware that when Our Lady of Fatima appeared, one of the things she told Sister Lucia, we have it from her final interview, when she was talking to Father Fuentes, is how she said that the final arms, the last things we'd have would be the rosary, that the final remedies were the rosary and devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And I've always thought it interesting that God has certainly granted more power to the rosary now. But those are two things that really, without them sort of like completely destroying your mind and making you, just killing you, really, they can't take away from you. We have said very often how you have to stay close to the sacraments, and you do. You do have to stay close to Mass and confession as best you can, but those things could be taken from us if they are able to take away our priests or shut down parishes or make, but the rosary and devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary are two things that we will keep. And so no matter how bad things get, how bleak things get, already there, Our Lady has given us many of the solutions are spiritual. And so we really have to focus on that, get better at praying our rosary, pray it better, and be very devoted to her Immaculate Heart, which is what the Message of Fatima is all about. It's the only solution. So those are my concluding words of the solution. Anything you'd like to add before we sign off, Tim?
I couldn't have said that better. I think that's absolutely true. If you discard everything else that I have said in this whole interview, just stick to that. That's if you can't do any of the rest of this, just stick to that.
Well, thank you, Tim. It has been a pleasure having you here. I really appreciate you making the time for us and educating us on a lot of these things that we may not know about. For all of our viewers, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Monique will have another special interview, but I do encourage you, please don't forget to like the show, subscribe to our channel, share this show with others so they can learn more about these problems and we can prepare ourselves better. And of course, never forget that Our Lady of Fatima has given us the only solution for our times. May God bless you, and Our Lady of Fatima, pray for us.
Pray for us.